kids find economics dull and stale. But Junior Achievement, in partnership with educators, brings a breath of fresh air into the classroom by having successful business people show kids the one thing about business that every economic theory neglects: the excitement. Support Junior Achievement. Show a kid how America works.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is a CNN special report, the release of the Tower Commission report.
Please be seated. On behalf of myself and the American people, I want to extend my thanks to Senator Tower, Secretary Muskie, and General Scowcroft. Whatever this report may say, I have appointed, or I'm proud to have appointed, this distinguished board because it fulfills my commitment to get the facts and share them with the American people. This is why I asked Attorney General Meese to conduct his review, and why, when that review uncovered unauthorized actions, I ordered full disclosure of what we then knew. It was why I urged the appointment of an independent counsel, and why I appointed David Abshire as my special counselor on this matter. And it is also why I ordered full cooperation with congressional inquiries. And it's why I appointed this board, the Tower Board. The significance of this board's work is reflected in the size of this volume, which I'm going to carefully study over the next several days. But Senator Tower, Secretary Muskie, and General Scowcroft, in completing the task so well, you've again demonstrated a willingness, one you've shown all your lives, to help your country, to devote yourself to public service. In a highly charged atmosphere, I know it wasn't easy to interrupt your lives, but this was an important contribution to your nation, and the American people are grateful to you for it. And now, in addition to thanking these distinguished gentlemen, I want to make it clear that I consider their work far too important for instant analysis. I intend to read and digest it first, think carefully about its findings, and promptly act on its recommendations. Next week, I will address the nation and give the American people my response to this report. But I pledge to the American people today that I will do whatever is necessary to enact the proper reforms and to meet the challenges ahead. I want to thank the members of the board again. And now, John, I'm sure there will be a few questions for you.
Mr. President, have you had Donald about sharing these arms with the Iranians? Are you leaving? Have you thought about it?
Donald Regan, the board will Donald Regan, sir, will Donald Regan be leaving as your chief of staff?
The Special Review Board has completed its work. Senator Muskie and General Scowcroft will have their own statements in a moment, but it might be helpful to give you the highlights of this rather lengthy report to the President. Before we begin, I want to note that I have never been privileged to work with two more public-spirited, perceptive, and intellectually honest men than Ed Muskie and Brent Scowcroft. Our working relationship was congenial and collegial. The report represents the collective understandings, evaluations, and judgments of all three of us. There were never any significant disagreements among us. It was incumbent upon us to put aside all partisan or personal loyalties and prejudices in fulfilling this demanding and challenging assignment. I emphasize that it was not our function to make judgments on criminal culpability. I want to express my gratitude to my colleagues for the considerable time they devoted, their dedication, and their sense of purpose. We would be remiss if we did not pay tribute to the small but dedicated, diligent, and highly professional staff that supported us. Under the circumstances of deadlines and our expectations, they put together a product I consider to be remarkable. Now let me discuss this report for a few minutes. Ed and Brent will each expand on this in their own statements at the completion of my remarks. We began our work December 1st of last year, the same day President Reagan appointed us and signed the executive order. The President, in the executive order, asked all departments and agencies to cooperate with us. When President Reagan appointed us, he urged that all the facts come out on the Iran-Contra matter. The President wanted us to examine this matter, to find lessons for the future, so that it can be put right. We considered the development of the NSC system over time. As part of that review, we interviewed former Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter, as well as most of the living Secretaries of State, Secretaries of Defense, Directors of Central Intelligence, National Security Advisors, as well as 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In addition, we looked at specific case studies of the NSC system from the administration of President Eisenhower to date in an effort to understand how the system works under stress. The Iran Initiative and Contra diversion served as the primary case study in our review. A summary of the facts on Iran-Contra is located in Part 3 of our report. Here and elsewhere, we have presented these facts as we understand them. Some information we have concluded must remain in the classified domain. No material, I emphasize no material, was deleted on the grounds that it might prove politically embarrassing to this administration. What was left out did not alter the substance of the report. Our conclusion is that there are indeed many powerful lessons to be learned. Part 4 of our report, called What Was Wrong, is intended to instruct on those lessons. It is important to emphasize, however, that putting into practice those lessons is not susceptible of quick fixes or easy answers. Our principal recommendation illustrates that point. Let me quote from the report here. Using the process will not always produce brilliant ideas, but history suggests it can at least help prevent bad ideas from becoming presidential policy. Now, the report you have is a lengthy one. Here are a few points you might keep in mind while reading through it. Mistakes were made, but those mistakes that attract headlines may give a distorted picture of how the NSC really works. We looked at case studies from crises of this and previous administrations. The Iran-Contra affair was clearly an aberration. The NSC system is alive and has served us well for the 40 years of its existence. We should profit from those mistakes. The President obviously desires to do so. It is a tribute to President Reagan that he had the courage to invite 3 outsiders in, give them complete access to sensitive national security files and administration personnel, and deal with the consequences. This act clearly demonstrates the strength and resilience of American democracy with its inherent capacity for constructive self-analysis and self-criticism. To make the NSC system work, it must be used. One of the mistakes made in the Iran Initiative was to ignore the process. Process is no substitute for substance. However, steady and consistent governance has a better opportunity of success if there is an orderly process for decision-making. The President is the ultimate decision-maker in national security. No one can or should pretend otherwise. We could not long endure exercise of executive power by committee. A strong executive with the flexibility to conduct foreign and diplomatic affairs is an essential feature of our form of government. Those who serve as presidential advisors on national security issues have a special responsibility. This is true for this or any administration. The advisors must assure that the president gets the best counsel possible. A president may not follow their advice, but the advisors have a clear responsibility to continue to bring to his attention matters that are pertinent even after the decision is made. Our report follows these principles. Taken as a whole, they constitute a guide to sound management. The board went to considerable lengths to obtain the facts about Iran-Contra. To the extent that we obtained them, they are in Appendix B. There, the story is told as best we know how. We also looked into the issue of NSC involvement in support of the Nicaraguan rebels, the so-called Contras. We did not have the time to do so thoroughly. However, what we learned is at Appendix C. The handling of the matter after it became known was of interest to us also. The board was able to take a broad look at this, but not in the detail which we devoted to the Iran initiative. That is included in Appendix D and summarized at the end of Part 4. The Congressional Investigating Committees and the Independent Counsel will carry on. We leave it to them to analyze new evidence. The value of this effort we leave to the judgment of the American people and to history. Senator Muskie will now give his statement and discuss Part 4 of the report. General Scowcroft will follow him and discuss our recommendations. Senator Muskie.
Thank you very much, John. I share John's evaluation of the work that we've done together. I have total respect for both of my colleagues, and I emphasize that this is a unanimous report, and I think it was clear from the beginning that it would be. I would also like to emphasize that the President, after all, appointed us to conduct the study. We wouldn't be here discussing the report except for that fact. We were given 2 extensions of time to conclude our work. We were given the kind of access to departments and agencies of the government which he promised us. I will address my remarks, as John has said, to Part 4 of the report, which is entitled, What Was Wrong? I commend it to those who would like a summary of our findings. It goes to our mandate to draw conclusions about the NSC system, and it forms the basis of our recommendations. So Part 4 and Part 3 taken together are the meat of what it is that we present. Now, the following are among the conclusions you will find in this section. Item: the Iran initiative was handled almost casually and through informal channels, always apparently with an expectation that the process would end with the next arms for hostages exchange. And of course it did not. It was subjected neither to the general procedures for interagency consideration and review of policy, nor the procedures for covert operations. Item: the opportunity for a full hearing before the President was inadequate. Item: interagency consideration of the initiative was limited to the cabinet level and inadequate at that. It was never examined at the staff level, where expertise on the situation in Iran, the difficulties of dealing with terrorists, and the mechanisms of conducting diplomatic openings may have made a difference. Item: intelligence analysis could also have provided an independent evaluation of the Israeli proposals, a systematic vetting of those engaged as intermediaries, and a thorough examination of the effect of the initiative on the balance in the Iran-Iraq war. Item: insufficient attention was given to the implications of the NSC staff having operational control of the initiative rather than the CIA. Item: concern for preserving the secrecy of the initiative provided an excuse for abandoning sound process. Item: The informality of the initiative meant that it lacked a formal institutional record and informed analysis. The result was that we were too often dependent on mere recollection instead of a clear and complete record. Item: the implementation of the initiative was never subjected to a rigorous review at appropriate times in this long 18-month history. The board also reached several conclusions regarding responsibility. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the highlights. I would be surprised if the list answered all the questions that you would like to put, but I hope that these will get you started. Item: the NSC system will not work unless the President makes it work. After all, this system was created to serve the President of the United States in ways of his choosing, by his actions, by his leadership. The President, therefore, determines the quality of its performance. Item: the President did not force his policy to undergo the most critical review of which the NSC participants and the process were capable. Item: the board found a strong consensus among NSC participants that the President's priority in the Iran initiative was the release of U.S. hostages. But setting priorities is not enough when it comes to sensitive and risky initiatives that directly affect U.S. national security. For it is the President who must take responsibility for the NSC system and deal with the consequences. Item: President Reagan's personal management style places an especially heavy responsibility on his key advisors. Knowing his style, they should have been particularly mindful of the need for special attention to the measures in which this arms sales initiative developed and proceeded. On this score, neither the National Security Advisor nor the other NSC principals deserve high marks. Item: the National Security Advisor failed in his responsibility to see that an orderly process was observed. Item: the Chief of Staff also shares in this responsibility. More than almost any Chief of Staff of recent memory, he asserted personal control over the White House staff and sought to extend this control to the National Security Advisor. He, as much as anyone, should have insisted that an orderly process be observed. In addition, he especially should have ensured that plans were made for handling any public disclosure of the initiative. Item: given the importance of the initiative, Secretary Schultz and Secretary Weinberger, while indicating their opposition, distanced themselves from the march of events. Item: there is no evidence that Director Casey made clear to the President that Lieutenant Colonel North, rather than the CIA, was running the operation. The President does not recall ever being informed of this fact. Indeed, Director Casey should have gone further and pressed for operational responsibility to be transferred to the CIA. I now yield to my colleague, General Scowcroft.
By way of echoing John's and Ed's introductory remarks, let me just say that I consider we operated not in a bipartisan, but a nonpartisan fashion. We had a great many arguments about semantics, but I recall not a single one about substance. As for our staff, who work days, nights, weekends, and holidays, they bring honor to the term staff or bureaucrat, as the case may be. The country owes them a major debt of gratitude. As Senator Tower said, we studied with care the operation of the NSC system over the 40 years of its existence. As far as we know, we're the first such official study to have focused exclusively on this institution. People tend to forget what the National Security Council system is all about. The NSC system, it's the council itself, the NSC staff, and the National Security Advisor, is the President's creature. The President is accountable to the American people for its successes and its failures. It is not just another agency of the executive branch. It is not intended to be subject to the reach of Congress. It is the President's own instrument. It is through this system that he brings his creative impulses in national security to bear on the permanent government, the departments and agencies. It is one of the few structures in government that is unequivocally his. The National Security Act recognized this by giving the President wide latitude to fashion it to his liking. Each president has done so, with the result that over the years there have been many different operational styles, many different operational organizational modes for the NSC staff and the National Security Advisor. Given its role, there is no ideal structure for the system. It should be sufficiently flexible to be adaptable to the management style and operating philosophy of any president. But there are certain functions which, in some manner, must be performed to provide every president with the tools he requires to do his job. The National Security Council exists for only one purpose: to advise the president in his awesome task of directing the national security policy of the country. It does not make decisions. The agency heads who participate in its deliberations are there not simply to represent their department views. They are there as individual advisors to offer their best judgment to the president. As the manager of this system, the National Security Advisor must ensure, at a minimum, that matters which come before the NSC cover the full range of issues on which a review is required, that a full range of options is considered together with their opportunities and their risks, that all relevant intelligence and other information is available to all the participants, especially the President, and that presidential decisions are fully understood and are implemented in the manner in which the President intended. But the National Security Advisor is not simply the manager of the process. We believe that he himself should be an important source of advice to the President. His is advice unburdened by agency burdens and perspectives. But he must, to play his role properly, also represent the views of the other principals fully and fairly. This is an essential, a difficult, but not an impossible task. The NSC staff which serves the National Security Advisor and the President should be small, highly competent, and experienced in policy making. It should be able neither to substitute for nor to duplicate the work of the agencies. It should not undertake operational functions except in the rarest of circumstances. Even then, that should be done only at the express direction of the President. Following a judgment, there are no feasible alternative ways to accomplish the task. We have described in the report a very general model of an NSC system to serve any president. We do not believe any amendment in the provisions of the National Security Act dealing with the structure and operation of the NSC system is required or is desirable. The Iranian affair, of course, has led to concerns for which legislative remedies have been suggested. One is Senate confirmation of the National Security Advisor. Our report cites several troubling aspects of the performance of the National Security Advisor. However, this is the President's problem, not that of the Congress. And confirmation, would introduce a number of new difficulties which we believe would be damaging. Another is a ban on an operational role for the NSC staff. We are opposed to the staff having such a role. Rather than a legislative proscription, however, we believe that if an operational assignment to the NSC staff appears essential, it should be undertaken only after explicit approval by the President. Our analysis of the Iranian affair, as Senator Muskie has stated, indicates to us that the problem at the heart was one of people, not of process. It was not that the structure was faulty, it is that the structure was not used. The President is a powerful figure under the Constitution. The objective should be to give him tools which will help and not inhibit the performance of his tasks. Unless the system is flexible enough to serve any president's needs, it will either become an obstacle and a source of frustration to the president or an institutional irrelevance as he fashions an informal structure more to his liking. We believe the recommendations we've outlined provide for a system which can be operated so as to minimize the likelihood of major error in national security policy without destroying the creative impulses of the President.
Gentlemen, did the President...
Mr. Plant.
Did the President take responsibility or deal with the consequences, as you say, in this case?
I think the President has said that he would take the responsibility for what happened. In this particular instance, I believe that the President was poorly advised and poorly served. I think that he should have followed up more and monitored this operation more closely. I think he was not aware of a lot of the things that were going on and the way the operation was structured and who was involved in it. He very clearly didn't understand all that.
You list a number of things you say the President should have done but did not do. To put it in plain English, are you saying the President made mistakes?
Yes, the President made mistakes. I think that's very plain English. The President did make mistakes. A lot of his subordinates made mistakes. I might note that every president has made mistakes from time to time, some of far greater consequence than the ones that President Reagan has made. I think that the whole initiative could be justified on the grounds of a geostrategic opening, but that the arms for hostage exchange cannot be justified and was actually counterproductive of the long-term objective of a geostrategic opening.
Senator Tower, and I'd like to ask all three of you to answer this, if you will, because you've all had long experience dealing with presidents. If you could put this in comparison to other presidents you've all worked with, how disengaged was this president from the process? How troubling is that to you? And how dangerous was it to have a foreign policy that the president wasn't running?
Let me make my comment on that, and my colleagues will have their own observations. President Reagan has a particular type of management style of delegating authority. And that style to work means that the president must be surrounded by experts who will act responsibly. At the same time, the president must from time to time monitor the actions of those to whom he delegates authority. Now, there are other presidents that have had different styles. Some have gotten heavily involved in the details of operations to the point where they fail to see the big picture. They lose vision and concept. I think that President Reagan is a man of great vision and concept. And I think for the most part, the operation of the foreign policy of this administration has been good. And I think the policy has been fundamentally sound. In this particular instance, it wasn't the public policy of the United States that was in question. But the fact is that there was a covert activity that was going absolutely contrary to the public policy of the United States that was set by the President himself.
Can I ask that?
Well, I think
both of the other gentlemen to answer that, too.
should be permitted to.
Yes, I think the key to the system is that it ought to be able to adapt to the management style of different presidents. And we've had some, as John said, going from the, if you will, the laid-back style, I think that was the term used, to a highly intrusive kind of a president. Now, what happened in this case is that the system did not compensate for the management style of the president. He did not perhaps ask enough questions, but it was incumbent upon the other participants in the system to ensure that the president was absolutely clear about what was going on. There should have been bells ringing, lights flashing, and so on, so that there was no question, not to try to steer him or anything, but no question what the consequences of his pursuing this policy was.
Let Senator Muskie comment.
Follow-up question to each of us?
He asked the whole panel to comment.
Yes, I know. Well, let me put it this way. The policy was a wrong policy, and it was the president's policy. And there's no question but what he felt deeply about that policy and about its purposes and objectives. He did truly believe that we ought to be thinking about developing an opening to Iran at the right time under the right circumstances. And that was not a casual position on his part, it was a deeply felt one. At the same time, he was emotionally and heavily involved in the fate of the hostages. And if you recall the last 18 months, there were many opportunities in which the president was exposed to the tragedy of these various hostage situations. And in July, for example, of 1985, the TWA hostages came back, and there was the funeral at Arlington Cemetery. And that day, and those circumstances, happened to coincide with the first initiative taken by the Israelis to present a proposal to him. And he reacted strongly. It's clear that he was driven by that compassion for the hostages from beginning to end. So there was this coincidence of presidential interests, which it is appropriate for the president to take. But given his heavy personal and emotional commitment to both objectives, it was then incumbent upon his staff to make sure that all of the implications of the policy were investigated, and I think I made some comments on that in my opening statement.
The lady in red in the back there. The lady in red back there.
Please. Senator, I'm interested in the corporate involvement in the financing of the situation. In particular, on page C6, it states that Colonel North had some connections to political action committees. In particular, I'd like to know about the fortunes, any of the Fortune 500, whether they themselves or subsidiaries financed this through charitable contributions, foundations, or political action committees.
Let me say that we did not deal with individual or private contributors to the Contras. That's not dealt with here. We did deal with the fact that NSC staff were obviously engaged in activities that in helping to manage and coordinate activities that were clearly not sanctioned by the Boland Amendment. The lady here in red.
In your conclusions on that, you have a lengthy appendix which says that Colonel North reported to both Mr. McFarland and then later to Admiral Poindexter about his involvement in resupplying the Contras. Now, do you conclude from that that was the policy of this government in contradiction to the Boland Amendment, and that others in the NSC, including Schultz, Weinberger, the President, the Vice President, were aware of it?
I don't believe that we and my colleagues can comment on this if they choose, but I don't believe that we found anything that would lead us to believe that the President was directly involved in this effort, that it was indeed an operation that was going on in the NSC staff, but that they were not personally involved or knowledgeable. And let me call on General Scowcroft on that.
How both McFarland and Poindexter could have been running this operation through Colonel North without the President's knowledge or Director Casey's knowledge or anyone else higher up knowing?
First of all, I think it's important to underscore that the legislative provisions dealing with Nicaragua and the Contras are extraordinarily complex, ambiguous, and it's not at all clear whether they were or were not operating in violation. Secondly, it was not our job to review criminal culpability. We looked at what happened and tried to figure out why it happened, not whether or not it was specifically in contravention of laws, other than was it in fact considered. It's a very murky question.
Indicated that the president has not been involved in a cover-up. Does that mean that the president has in fact been honest with the American people at all stages of this investigation?
I think the president did not direct, and we don't use the term cover-up, the president did not direct the preparation of the materials that were employed in his public presentations of November 13th and November 19th, I believe. There was a deliberate effort to mislead by those who prepared these materials. I don't believe that the president wittingly misled the American people. I think the president was convinced himself of the veracity of what he was saying. I think at the same time that he was that he felt that there was still an opportunity perhaps for additional hostages to be released. I think he felt very strongly that any public comment that he might make could conceivably have some impact on the safety, the personal safety of people, of both hostages and people in Iran.
Senator, you heard
Right
from
here.
the president on 3 occasions, twice in testimony and once by letter, and there are variances in that testimony about the authorization from the Israeli shipment. Could you address what you find and what you believe the president's position on that is, and whether the board finds and what its finding is in terms of an authorization to the Israelis to make that shipment?
Absent any evidence to the contrary, we have to conclude that the president's recollection of when the first shipment was approved is faulty. Now, he does acknowledge having approved it. The question is whether it was approved prospectively or retrospectively. The board has made a plausible judgment, in my view, that the shipment was approved prior to the first August 30th transfer of arms. Now, again, that is a judgment on our part. Ms. White.
You're considered a Reagan loyalist. You headed up the Reagan-Bush campaign in Texas, viewed as sympathetic to the president. What steps do you think he needs to take to, restore public confidence in his ability to govern?
Well, I think the president must respond with great candor. I think that there's a great deal that he will learn from reading our report that has not been brought to his attention by his subordinates. As you know, we criticize his subordinates a great deal here. Even though I have been a supporter of this president and still regard myself as a supporter of this president, I'm not going to give public advice on how he should handle it.
You painted a rather damning picture of the top aides that surround the president. Mr. Casey, Poindexter, North, that many of them misled the president, did not do their jobs, basically. The nation's been through a nightmare before in terms of White House staff. How can this not happen again?
Well, I don't think that you can guarantee that mistakes will not be made in future. What happened here was a failure to use the process that was available to the president. The failure to follow guidelines that had already been set down by this administration in a classified document in January of 1985. Had the prescribed system been followed, probably all of this would not have happened. But one thing is very, very clear, that members of the system who were privy to what was going on failed the president. They failed to advise him. They failed to insist on periodic review. They failed to expose him to expert judgments and briefings on matters that he should have been made privy to, because the president clearly didn't understand the nature of this operation, who was involved, and what was happening.
Were there any heroes at all in this? We've read parts of this, and you're pretty critical of almost everybody, including the president. Did anybody do his or her job? Did anybody blow the whistle or attempt to? Is there anything good in here?
We're not in the business of either determining criminal culpability or finding heroes. We tried to present an objective report, and all of our comments on individual personalities, I think, are very objectively done. I wouldn't try to single out heroes, because this is really a story of people whose performance was perhaps somewhat short of heroic.
Nobody did anything right.
There are two things here that seem to stand out. One, that the staff did not inform the president, that they excluded him from knowing about things. And two, that the president did not insist on knowing when he had started this operation, must have known it was proceeding. Why do you think the people were afraid to tell the president what was going on, and why do you think the president didn't insist on knowing?
Well, that would be speculative for me to answer that question, Sarah, but it's not my position here to be speculative. I'm here as a member of the board. Maybe later on I'll do a little speculation, but I don't propose to do it now because I want to try to give you objective answers to the questions.
The report would seem to suggest that almost every step along the way, a disregard for what was legal or what might not have been legal, an almost deliberate attempt to avoid pursuing that question at each step. Does anything need to be done to prevent that?
Well, I think the single most important factor here is the over-obsession with secrecy. In a system of this kind, and there are occasions when it's necessary to hold closely information about especially covert operations, but even possibly other operations of the government. Well, every time that you are over-concerned about secrecy, you tend to abandon process. I mentioned some of those points in my opening statement. And the result is that in this case, control of the operation slipped into the hands of Lieutenant Colonel North and the people that he assembled to pursue it. And the details, I think, are spelled out here, and I won't try to summarize them here in the answer to your question. But once that happened, you see, then it was operating outside established government circles and was in the hands of intermediaries from outside the government and others. So that it was very difficult then for the president or those who have direct responsibility to him to get the information.
Senator here. Has the president's policy been arms for hostages exchange? Was it or wasn't it?
That's what it became. Regardless of what it started out as, and I have no reason to believe that it didn't start out as anything but a geostrategic opening to Iran, which fundamentally is desirable because Iran occupies a very strategic position. And we have certain long-term objectives in which a formal relationship with Iran would serve. However, I think it very quickly became an arms for hostage deal, and the whole chronology of the affair, I think, very clearly demonstrates that that's what it became. In which event, of course, the idea of a geostrategic opening provided the rationale.
You say the NSC staff does not deserve high marks for this, but what kind of marks does the president deserve, and do you think he's had a weak style of management?
Well, this goes back to a question that was asked earlier. After all, the system has performed pretty well during the course of this administration, up to this instance. As we noted in our report, this was an aberration, the Iran-Contra affair, and the system broke down. My colleagues already commented on the fact that every president has his own style. Now, you can say that perhaps this president holds himself a little bit too aloof from the implementation of policy. I think a lot of people made the criticism of his predecessor, President Carter, that he got too much involved in details. Perhaps there's a happy medium somewhere in between. But up to this point, I know a lot of members of the press complained that they could never get a handle on this president, and a lot of his detractors did. Well, the reason is because the performance to date has been pretty satisfactory. This is an aberration. That's my view.
in your conclusions, in your recommendations, you suggest that Congress fold its intelligence agencies and merge them into one. And in your in the findings, you suggest that the secrecy was one of the problems. Was there any justification in the minds of the NSC staff for withholding the information from Congress in light of your recommendation? Is there justification that they felt Congress might leak it?
I think our report also says that Congress very often gets disproportionate blame for leakage. And one can certainly believe that if one scrutinizes the history of the past 2 months. But there is the natural tension between the President and Congress that always exists. The President has a unique responsibility in the field of foreign affairs. Only the President really can formulate and implement foreign policies subject to certain constitutional checks by the Congress. And presidents do get obsessed with secrecy. They all do. And they don't want to expose an operation or see the security of it violated. So there's a natural inclination not to want to share. However, I think, on the other hand, that consultation with Congress can be a protection for the President and can be a useful tool for him. In fact, there are times when deferring notification of the Congress may be really essential. Let's take the Iran hostage rescue operation in 1980, for example. I think that President Carter was perfectly justified in not notifying the Congress until the mission was aborted. In this instance, I think a case can be made for deferring notification of the Congress because of the danger that hostages or certain Iranian contacts might be in as a result of information leaking. But I think that presidents must not get too obsessed with this, and I think that one thing that might tend to cure this obsession would be for Congress to abandon the system of select intelligence committees with large staffs in both houses and have a joint committee patterned after the old Joint Committee on Atomic Energy with a relatively small, tight staff. We've simply recommended that Congress consider that.
Senator Muskie, we have seen a process that involves many nations, foreign and covert operations. In describing the management style of the President, it appears to have been without the oversight of the President, and Congress also seems to have been deprived of oversight. My question is, then, to whom devolves responsibility, constitutionally speaking, for this wide range of operations?
Well, to the extent that other countries were involved in one way or another, there are limits to how much of that we can disclose. But with respect to the principal operation here, we're talking about an initiative that began either in Iran or in Israel or in the United States. Now, we cannot, and I think the report clearly presents the facts that might lead to any of those three conclusions. But the responsibility, obviously, since the President conducts foreign policy, the responsibility lies in the executive branch. And this is why our report concentrates very heavily on the failure of the NSC system to perform as it should have.
Lady in blue.
Yes. Senator Tower, you were just talking about how you feel about all of this. I wonder, as a former senator, and Mr. Muskie's the same thing, and Mr. Scowcroft, do you actually think, after all that you know, that some laws were broken? What do you personally think about that?
I think you've asked for the whole panel to comment, so I'll defer first to General Scowcroft and then to Senator Muskie.
I am A, not a lawyer, B, that is not what we focused on. What we did identify is that there were a number of laws that did apply in one way or another to the kinds of operations that were conducted. And what we did determine is that there was apparently no clear, searching legal analysis as to what was or was not permitted by them.
Senator Muskie, would you?
Well, with respect to the laws which could bear on individual or criminal culpability, that was outside our area. I would not speculate
Well,
on,
we
on a matter
really...
of criminal culpability. There were obviously people whose performance was wrong, but that is something different than reaching a conclusion that it was criminal.
And we were not charged with doing that. That's the job of the special prosecutor. We can't make any judgment on that.
General Scowcroft, you talked about that the process was basically good. Part of the problem was that the president's management style didn't challenge it. Is there any reason to believe anything is going to change? He's had this management style for a long time.
Well, I don't think that you can expect the president to change his management style, or basically any president to adapt to the NSC structure. The NSC structure ought to adapt to the president. Now, I think Senator Tower has said maybe the president is a little too casual in challenging the system. But the people in the system have the fundamental responsibility to keep the president aware and to keep under his sight the pitfalls of every policy that he wants to pursue.
But is it not your finding that they thought they were doing what he wanted done?
Oh, I don't think there's any question they thought they were doing what he wanted done. And they probably were. That is not the point. It is not the point of the system to tell a president he can't do this or can't do that, but to make crystal clear to him what the possible consequences of pursuing that. And I think we see the consequences in this case, which were not laid out.
Ms. Lasky.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Muskie, in your litany of people subordinates to the president who failed in advising him properly, you listed the Secretary of State and Defense and people at the NSC. Notably absent was Vice President Bush. What is his responsibility in either having been aware of some of this or having failed to properly advise the president?
Well, of course, Vice President Bush doesn't have a management responsibility, but he has a responsibility as one of the 4 statutory members of the National Security Council. And he was present at several of there were not too many. As a matter of fact, all too few full meetings of the National Security Council. And I ought to take this question as an opportunity to point out that people refer to the National Security Council, which is 4 statutory people: Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Vice President, and the President. And then the President usually nominates a couple of others, the Director of the CIA, and and of course the National Security Advisor, and occasionally others. But that's the Council. But they confuse that often with the National Security Staff, which is in place to serve the Council. Well, the Council itself is an advisory body. The Council doesn't perform staff operations. It's the staff that does that. Now, Vice President Bush, of course, is a member of the Council. Now, in this case, I think there were not more than 2 or 3, at most 3, meetings of the National Security Council to consider this policy, its consequences, its progress, its results, and its problems. So there were too few meetings at which Vice President Bush and the other members of that council were given an opportunity or had an opportunity to influence the result.
Whether there were circumstances outside of the formal meetings of the NSC where Vice President Bush might have been made aware or learned of what was going on?
Well, it's a little difficult to get that kind of a record.
Yes. You were not able to interview Colonel North or Vice Admiral Poindexter. You weren't able to get access to Swiss bank accounts. How much of the story do you think is still out there, still untold?
We feel that there is some out there that is untold, of course. For example, although we had evidence of a Contra diversion, there was no way we could conclude that there had actually been a diversion to the Contras, because we didn't have access to these accounts. We didn't have access to Colonel North or Admiral Poindexter, and we can't establish what happened to the money. So quite frankly, that's something that we couldn't uncover, and that remains to others to try to solve that riddle.
Are you satisfied the evidence won't show in the future that the president may have known?
I won't speculate about what will happen in the future. We are satisfied that the President had no knowledge of any diversionary effort.
There are references in your report to missing documents, specifically some of Admiral Poindexter's documents. Do you believe that any relevant documents were destroyed or altered, and if that's the case, who did that?
There's no way for us to know whether or not documents that have been destroyed were relevant, because we didn't have access to them before they were destroyed. So that would be a question we could only speculate on.
General Scowcroft said that you had no differences in substance but in semantics. My question is, did you argue over language about the President's involvement, the President's responsibility? Was there a watering down of...
No, there was none, and I will ask my colleagues to comment on that. Nothing about watering down. We got into a lengthy debate on split infinitives one time, I remember. But let me ask Senator Muskie to comment on that.
There was no cover-up within our operation.
Speaking of a cover-up,
the Commission could have taken a much narrower focus on the National Security Council staff operations and still fulfilled its mandate. Can you enlighten us a little bit on how and why you decided to broaden the scope of your inquiry, and enlighten us a bit on what the White House's response?
We actually did not broaden the scope of our inquiry. The White House, we were brought into being by the Iran-Contra affair. That's what prompted the White House to appoint this board. And the President specifically directed us to study the Iran-Contra case and other cases. Well, there's already available a number of studies on other cases that we accessed and that we cited from time to time. This one we had to do our own study because it wasn't all out. And that's why this occupied a great deal of our time. Our conclusions and our recommendations, I should say, really are based not just on the Iran-Contra affair, but on the performance and operation of the National Security Council and the National Security Council staff, the National Security Advisor, historically.
Senator Muskie, could the members of the board give their understanding of the role of Israel in the whole affair, both in the policy formulation, in the provision of intelligence, and in the facilitation of the affair?
You want us all to comment? General Scowcroft, go ahead.
Well, we don't have a full picture of the role of Israel in this, partly because we have testimony only from one side. The Israelis did not make themselves available to us. There's no question that the Israelis encouraged, if not, did not initiate this policy, and that they did whatever they could when it appeared to be flagging from time to time to renew its vigor. I think the problem is that our goals and the Israeli goals were not synonymous. Indeed, in some respects, they may have been in conflict. But the Israelis certainly supported if they did not take a lead in the policy.
Senator Muskie.
Well, that is essentially it. We tried positively. We met with the ambassador here in Washington to request their participation, or to request that they make available to us servants of the Israeli government and Israeli citizens who could contribute to our understanding of this system. They found it, they rejected that idea, and so we are not in a position to evaluate from their point of view. But I think that General Scowcroft has summarized our impression of the situation.
Yes, and I would emphasize that there was heavy Israeli involvement. Of course, the final decision on our own participation was our own. But clearly, there were members of the Israeli government that perceived the service of their own national interest in involving themselves in this matter. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for your order, and be sure to look for your free gift. Would you like to receive a free gift too and save money at the same time? I'll be right back to show you how.
In the
movies, good guys wore white, bad guys wore black. But the real West wasn't black and white. Marshal Wyatt Earp started out as a gunslinger, and ruthless outlaws like Jesse James became popular heroes. Now, Time Life book shows the West like it really was. This book, The Gunfighters, reveals the men behind the legends. Butch Cassidy's Wild Buck, John Wesley Hardin, who shot a man for snoring. Billy the Kid, Judge Roy Bean. He once fined a dead man $40 for carrying a concealed weapon. Their stories are all here. So are their guns, plus rare photographs and great Western art. The Gunfighters is yours for 10 days free. If you like it, receive volumes every other month. The Great Chiefs, the Gamblers, each has the look and feel of hand-tooled saddle leather. If you care about the West as much as I do, you want everyone. The Old West from Time Life Books. It makes me feel like I was there.
Hi, I'm Kathy at Time Life Books. If you call now, you'll get the Gunfighters for just $4.95 plus shipping and handling. That's $8 off the regular price. Plus, you'll receive this Western belt buckle free when you purchase your first book.
Call 1-800-228-3800. That's 1-800-228-3800.
This offer ends soon, so call now.